Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me today for some virtual vitamin Z as we bring the Detroit Zoo to you. My name is Claire and I'm a curator of education with the Detroit Zoological Society, where we are celebrating and saving wildlife. So today we're going to talk about flamingos, and there are two different species of flamingos that the Detroit Zoo cares for, both Chileans and graders. And we've talked about Chileans before, so today we're going to talk about the greater flamingos. And let me show you where their range is, or where they live in the world. I'm going to pull out my trusty globe. So we're going to start up here in Detroit and Michigan, where we usually do. We know the Chilean flamingos live down here in South America. So today we're going to go across the globe to the other side of the world, and greater flamingos live throughout most of Africa, part of Southern Europe, the Middle East, and even into India. So they have a really wide range, and there's a lot of greater flamingos out there in the world. So today, as we talk about greater flamingos, we're also going to talk about lesser flamingos. I know, greater flamingos, lesser flamingos. It sounds like a math lesson. In actuality, it's a rescue story. And to do that, we have a couple vocabulary words today. Those words include persistence, determination, and improvise. And those will come up as we tell this rescue story, so keep an ear out for them. But let's start with the greater flamingos, who are in our care at the Detroit Zoo. So greater flamingos are the largest of the 6 different species of flamingos, which are birds known for their amazing coloration, those beautiful pinks, reds, and oranges. So this is a greater flamingo, and they eat some of the similar things that Chileans and other flamingos do. So they're going to eat seeds, crustaceans, which are like shrimps and crabs, and that blue-green algae that has that special pigmentation in it that helps give them that beautiful coloration. So the greater flamingo is the largest. They also live in large flocks called a flamboyance, and that's for safety. If you travel together in a large group, it's easier to warn each other if there's a predator coming. And these birds are about 4 to 5 feet tall, but they only weigh about 4 to 8 pounds, which is important if you're a large bird that flies. You have to be pretty light. So these are the greater flamingos, and this is a lesser flamingo. So they're very similar. They're a bit smaller. In fact, lesser flamingos are the smallest of the flamingo species, and they have a little bit more black on their bills. So many of these lesser flamingos live at a human-made urban wetland in South Africa. And from October to April, up to 100,000 of these crook-beaked birds will go down to the Camphors Dam in Kimberley, South Africa, to mate, to nest, and to rear their chicks. And it's one of only 4 breeding sites in the world for this vulnerable species. So back in 2019, about 7,000 flamingo eggs were laid, and the local folks thought, this is amazing, we cannot wait. So here's a picture of this dam, and this is an important part of the story. So the dam is actually human-made. About 40 years ago, Kimberley started piping all of their sewage and runoff into an empty salt flat, and it turned into a wetland. So there's a lot of nutrients in that water, so it turns into this blue-green algae growth, right? Which attracts the flamingos, because we know that they love that as a food, and that's what gives them that awesome coloration. And a whole bunch of other water birds move in too. So some of the local conservation groups noticed that this was happening, and they worked with a local mining company, and they built these really cool S-shaped islands. And these are nesting spots for the flamingos, so as the water in the dam continued to rise, they still had a place to nest. They even went as far as to make little mounds, like the flamingos nest on, so they could feel at home. So then we start to run into trouble. 7,000 eggs are laid, tens of thousands of birds in this space, and then a drought happens. So the water dries up, the food disappears, and this is not uncommon. Birds will leave if they don't have enough food to feed themselves and their chicks, and they'll abandon the chicks and the eggs. The amount of chicks that were left behind in this case was staggering. There was about 2,000 chicks left behind, both hatched and unhatched. So local conservation groups immediately started stepping in. They came from across South Africa to assess how many birds needed help, and they contacted their colleagues in the United States and the United Kingdom, who started flying in medicine, tools, and people to help with this effort. It just so happened that one of our veterinarians from the Detroit Zoological Society was in South Africa when this happened. She was working with an organization called Volpro, who helps vultures in Africa. So the veterinarian called 2 of our animal care staff, Bonnie, our associate curator of birds, and Cher, who's one of our bird supervisors, who have a lot of expertise in flamingo care. They put together a plan, and within 24 hours, the veterinarian was on a plane flying out to Kimberly to start helping with this flamingo rescue. So here's boxes of flamingo chicks that are getting ready to be shipped on a trailer down to the airport, put in a plane, and flown back with our veterinarian to Volpro, and Volpro agreed to help with this massive effort. So once they get back to Volpro, they have boxes and boxes of flamingo chicks, and now they have to put together a whole bunch of routines to help these little guys survive. Fortunately, we had just spent about 5 months helping a young Chilean chick called, young flamingo chick called Mr. Meyer, who needed a little extra help after he hatched out. So we had real-time experience very recently in how to raise a flamingo chick, and that became really important in this process. So they had to figure out what to feed the chicks. So they ended up a blend of shrimp, fish, eggs, rice cereal, and some vitamins. They had to determine how often the chicks needed to be fed, how much antibiotics and fluids for the ones that were sick. They had to make sure their temperature and the humidity was correct. And they had to start providing housing for all these flamingo chicks. Now keep in mind, Volpro is used to working with 18-pound vultures, whereas a baby flamingo chick weighs about 2 ounces, which is about the same as a tennis ball. So this is a huge difference. So shortly after, Bonnie, our associate curator of birds, and Cher shortly after her, came down to South Africa to help with this effort. And you might think, well, what do you pack when you fly down to South Africa to help raise a couple hundred flamingo chicks? Well, you pack things like stuffed animals and pans and pools and feeding tubes and syringes and medicines and vitamins and sheer determination to ensure that they were going to give the best opportunity for all of these chicks to survive. So this is one of their improvised situations to house the chicks. They used all the tubs they had from around Volpro, and they put these little cardboard dividers in. And they were pretty persistent in finding this solution. They tried out several other things before they came to realize that this was going to be the best housing situation for the flamingo chicks. And you can see those red lights hanging over the tubs. Those are heat lamps. They're trying to keep the chicks at just the right temperature so they can grow and thrive. Here's a picture of Cher and one of Bonnie as they're hand feeding all these chicks. You have to remember, they can't just put food out for all these baby flamingos. They have to hand feed them around the clock to make sure that they're getting all the nutrients they need. And as the chicks grew, they had to provide larger housing for them because chicks don't stay little forever. So the Volpro team, along with some volunteers, made these larger wood structures and put screening over them, again with the heat lamps, so these flamingo chicks could live together in groups just like they would out in the wild if they were still living on the dam. They provided outdoor areas for them to learn and grow in, pools for them to learn how to swim in, and those stuffies on this side there for them to cuddle up and feel secure with around the clock. So I included this picture so we could all give a virtual round of applause to the incredible Detroit Zoological Society team who went down there to help with this massive rescue effort. We have Bonnie, our veterinarian, Dr. Woodhouse, and Cher, and I'm just so incredibly impressed by these women's dedication and their persistence to making sure that as many of these flamingos as possible could not only just survive, but thrive before they could be re-released back out into their native habitat. So to celebrate flamingos today, I put together a pretty short art activity that is really more about the process than it is the product. And you don't need too many materials to do it, but I listed them out for you so you could prepare them if you want to partake in this activity. All you need is some white paper, some watercolor paints, the colors red, orange, pink, and black. You need a paintbrush, a straw, like a drinking straw, preferably a reusable straw, a cup of water, and some pencils and marker. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint a flamingo. And I put together a really short video on what this looks like. So I sketched out a flamingo on here, and then I painted in the neck with some pink watercolor paint, and I'll let you see that for just a moment before I move on to the next step, because the next step is really the fun part. Again, this is more about the process than it is the product, so no one has to be an artist to do any of this. I'm certainly not. I just kind of filled in the lines with the paint. I would have just done it freehand, but I get a little wild sometimes with watercolors, so I thought it'd be better if I gave myself some lines to fit inside with. So after I fill in this long neck that's so characteristic of the flamingos, and again with that beautiful pink coloration, and I used a couple different colored pinks to get that pigmentation color that they get from eating all those crustaceans like shrimps, and then that blue-green algae. And now I'm making little puddles of paint. And I'm going to mix a couple different colors in here. I made some puddles of the pink, and then I'm going to add in a little bit more water, and I'll show you why I'm doing all that. And now I'm going to add in a little bit more coloration of the orange, because oftentimes you see flamingos, they also have like those reddish oranges, bright, beautiful colored feathers. So I'm going to add in some more of that paint down here in the pools of watercolor that I have going on. And then I'm going to take, I actually added a little bit of purple in there too, because I thought that might be fun just to kind of blend in a few more colors. So then I'm going to take my reusable straw, and instead of continuing to use my paintbrush, I'm going to use a straw and I'm going to blow that paint across the back of the flamingo's body to give a different kind of texture and a different feel as to what that looks like. And you can see I don't have quite enough paint to go all the way across the body, so I'm going to do this process a few more times, adding more pools of paint and then blowing them across the body with the straw. And let's scoot forward a little bit so you can see what that looks like. Now you can see that I have a whole bunch of those different colors in there, and again, more pools of the colors, those mixing the pinks and the oranges and the reds, and I'm going to continue blowing them across the side of my paper. Now, if you're wiser than me, you'll put a piece of paper towel underneath your paper so you don't blow watercolor all over your table and have to clean it up later. Not that watercolor is hard to clean up, but you might just save yourself a couple extra minutes. All right, so you get the idea of how this all looks. So when you're done, you end up with something like this after it dries up a bit. And I went back through and I put some black paint on the eye and the beak to give a little bit of coloration there, but you might use a marker instead, because markers are sometimes a little bit easier to control, especially when you're doing fine work. And I actually brought the flamingo down to my remote work location so you can see what he looks like. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with him just yet. I might drop him off to the bird care staff back at the zoo. But that's my flamingo. And again, it's more about the process than it really is about the product. Even if you have youngsters at home, put some paint out and let them use those straws to blow the water across, the watercolors across, and see what they can create. Now, you might be wondering, well, what's something I can do today to help flamingos? And there's something actually pretty simple. You remember that all of those flamingos got stranded there because of a drought. That drought happened because our climate is changing. And there's a couple simple things that you can do to help mitigate climate change. One of them is to eat a more plant-based diet. So putting more fruits and vegetables into your diet. When we eat things like meat, the livestock have to eat, and when they eat, they digest their food and they produce methane when they pass gas. That methane is a really effective heat-trapping blanket that coats the atmosphere and traps the warm energy inside that atmosphere. By eating more plants, we're reducing the amount of meat that we need and reducing the amount of methane in the atmosphere. And if you want to pay tribute to your flamingo friends, you could eat some plants that are rich in beta-carotene, that pigmentation that gives them their awesome color. So things like squash and carrots, apricots, and grapefruits rather. All right, so we covered greater flamingos, lesser flamingos, the incredible rescue effort that the Detroit Zoological Society was able to help with in South Africa, because we happened to be there at the right time, at the right place, and had the right expertise. And I left you with a kind of fun activity that, again, is more about the process and the product that you can try at home. So thanks for joining me today. If you're looking for more virtual vitamin Z, check out our website. DetroitZoo.org. There's a whole bunch of virtual vitamin Z videos on there, as well as live cameras into some of the different animal habitats. Thanks for being here today. Take care and stay safe.